Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm doing a series of quick tips. I'm doing different themes. I'm into my amp today and I was going to replace my filter capacitors and I thought this would be a good opportunity. These filter capacitors are probably 20 plus years old and they're really cheap. This is the very first amp that I ever serviced. It's an old Bassman 10, Fender Bassman 10. And I've got a lot better capacitors that I'm going to install. You can see just difference in size between the cheap 20 and the better German FT 22. Same thing with my larger caps. There's two 80s, big old fat caps now. So I'm going to be replacing those. When you're servicing an amp, you're going to want to discharge your capacitors before you get started. You can Google another video on that. It's pretty simple. You just make yourself a little discharge tool, which amounts to a couple of alligator clips on a wire with a couple of resistors in the middle. I need to remove the old caps. Just a quick tip, if you're going to do this yourself, it's not a bad idea to take a picture of everything before you get started. I've shown this tool before. This is a solder sucker. I'm going to be using this to remove some of the old solder from the eyelets on the board. Basically it's just a plunger that you push down, and when you hit the button here it draws all that solder straight out of that eyelet. When you get your caps out, or even if they're still in, you might be able to see a directional arrow that tells you which side is negative and which side is positive. Electrolytic caps are directional, so you want to make sure you keep a note of where the minus sign and the arrow is pointing to. So on this cap, and I believe on its two neighbors, the negative side is pointing to the top, to these three eyelets, whereas on these two caps the negative sides are pointing in two different directions. So you need to keep a note of that. Now that I've got all five removed, I'm going to set them down on my workbench. I'm just going to keep them in the same order that they were in on the board so that I can reference the directions on the arrows if I need to. Now I just need to get the rest of these eyelets cleaned up. I finished cleaning my eyelet board. I got all the solder sucked out of all the eyelets, and I've got all of the extra rosin flux cleaned up from the old solder joints. This is my first 80. I've got it cut and put into place. I just have these other connection points set into place. I've taken out my resistors. You don't need to do that unless you're not replacing your resistors, but I'm actually going to change these metal oxides over to a more vintage style resistor. When you're soldering, what you want to do is heat the eyelet. Give it a chance to soak some heat in, and then introduce the solder into an area that's not touching the soldering iron. Once it starts to melt, you just want to fill the eyelet. You don't need the solder standing proud of the board, you just need it to fill the eyelet. Well, I had to keep the old resistors because I didn't have new ones. Thought I did. Oh well. Just keep plugging along. Remember to put your wires back where they go. Well, that's the entire cap job. If you're using expensive caps, make sure you leave those labels pointing up so people can tell they're in there. Thanks for watching. If you like this channel, be sure to like and subscribe and tell your friends. Thanks a lot.